Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged Unboxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. Glad you joined us. We are going to have a little different format today. We are sans guest. Instead, I thought it would be fun to do kind of a mailbag kind of show. You know, we get your questions every week, but a lot of times we don't really have as much time as we'd like to answer as many of them as we would like to. So I thought, as we have done once or twice before, we'll do a show that's devoted exclusively to the questions that you have asked. And we got a bunch of them that we're going to get to. Toward that end, and also to kick things off overall, let me bring in my partner in crime, Trip Mitchell. Trip, how are you?
I am doing great, Al. And sometimes when you're doing a great fight, so you had an incredible card from Carson, California last weekend. Do you ever go, I don't need to get paid for this. I'm just happy to be here?
That thought has never actually crossed my mind, no.
Never, ever?
Not really. Does that make me a mercenary or what? I'm not sure. You do feel like what you're doing is a labor of love, that's for sure. And that was the case this weekend from the Dignity Health Sports Park, formerly the,
The Home
Depot Center, and a couple other names as well. And that location has a great history of having great fights. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, does it really? What's the difference where people fight? You'd think, for some reason, though, that area, that specific location produces great fights, and that's what we had this past week on Showtime in the first of a series of cards that we're going to have all the way through September. And our very next one is going to be at that same location on May 29th with Nonito Donaire and Nordine Ubali heading up what is another trio of great fights, and I think could be almost as good as what we had this past week. We had in our main event Brandon Figueroa and Neri again for a world title, and Figueroa won by knockout in what was a pitched battle. And we also had Danny Roman, a former champion, against Ricardo Espinoza, what turned out to be a wild 10-rounder that Roman won. And in our first fight, a fight that honestly I wouldn't have necessarily expected to be this good, because we had a late replacement, Juan Carlos Burgos, who stepped in to face 130-pound contender Xavier Martinez. Juan Carlos Burgos fought, he's a 33-year-old, who's a 17-year veteran of the sport, who has become a little bit of a trial horse for undefeated fighters, going the distance but losing. He's never been stopped in his life. Well, he came out firing on all cylinders, and while he didn't win the decision against Xavier Martinez, he put on a fantastic show, and the whole card was probably in the top 10 of all the cards. If you want to take the whole card, it's probably in the top 10 of fight nights that I've ever done in my life, which is, pretty extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, I thought about it afterwards, and I thought that's saying something. So it was a pretty extraordinary night.
It'd be interesting sometime in the future to have you give I know you're not big on lists, but top 10 fights where a replacement fighter came in and acquitted himself so well, or had the upset in the win, because that would be a great category. Yeah,
it is, and it has happened in the past for sure, and this was a perfect example of it. And we've actually had fighters come in and do the upset as well. Now this weekend, I will not be doing boxing, but I will be going to a very special event. They're going to have an event honoring the late Marvelous Marvin Hagler. The city of Brockton, Massachusetts, is putting it on the Sunday, the 23rd of this Sunday, 23rd of May, and it's going to be at the Rocky Marciano Stadium in Brockton, and admission is free, though there might be limited seating, but people, if they're in the area or can get to the area, they can maybe contact Brockton about information and look online, and there's a lot of stories about how to arrange to get seated there. And we're going to have it's going to be a special tribute to him. There'll be a number of, Bernard Hopkins is going to be there. I'll be on hand. Ron Borges, the famous sports writer, a number of other sports personalities will take part in the program, a special program to honor marvelous Marvin Hagler. So I'm thrilled that I was invited to come to it, and a chance to say goodbye to a man who was a good friend of mine and, of course, an icon in the sport of boxing. And this will be kind of an official goodbye to him for boxing fans. So looking forward to that for sure.
And you were lucky enough to be heavily, heavily involved in the 80s, where Golden Age and the Four Kings. And I know this means a lot to you personally, but that to me was an amazing, amazing decade of boxing.
It was. The 80s, I think, was the best decade boxing maybe has ever had. And the Four Kings were a big part of that. You know, Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, Duran. They ignited the flame for that whole decade. And then there were a whole host of other great fighters that added to it. And we're going to be having a documentary on Showtime called The Four Kings, which is starting, I think, in June, early June. I'll have to get the date on that. We'll be promoting it here, but it's going to be a really interesting show. And so that era was very special to me. I got to participate in it, and it's weird. It just seems like the time has flown since then, because it seems like yesterday I was involved with Marvin Hagler, sitting there interviewing him before his fight with Tommy Hearns a few days before, when we walked up we started to walk up the steps to the ring, and he kind of came behind me and came too close, and we were on those steps, and all of a sudden we kind of both lost our balance and we almost fell over, and Marvin, we finally got in the ring, and everybody was a little shaken, and Marvin said, he said, I can tell you something. He said, I can tell you exactly who they would have blamed if we'd have fallen and I couldn't make this fight. Meaning me, of course. Yeah. So it was, but it's a great era for sure.
Yeah, the Petronelli brothers knew who to call to have you taken out to the desert.
I would have been in big trouble for sure.
Okay, well, let's get to some great questions. Miguel asks, what's your breakdown, Fulton versus Figueroa? First question.
Yeah, that's the fight on September 11th. Brandon Figueroa won the title, and now is going to be in a unifying title match with one of the other title holders, Stephen Fulton Jr., who just beat Angelo Leo to win the title. That is set for September 11th. They have been woofing at each other on social media. It's going to be a fascinating matchup. Figueroa is a very intriguing fighter, a big, tall, rangy 5'8" fighter in that weight division, who likes to fight on the inside. He doesn't even use his height and his reach. He just walks to you and he mauls you. And he beat Luis Neri with a huge body shot. And so stylistically, it's going to be a fascinating fight. Stephen Fulton is a boxer, but against Angelo Leo, he stood right in the pocket and battled with Leo, who's a phenomenal body puncher. He's there must be something about that weight division. Everybody is a great body puncher, and Leo certainly is. And Stephen Fulton beat Leo at his own game and won a decision. So that fight, I think these 122-pound things bookend our big lineup of fights. And the first one was great, and I have a feeling the last one is going to be great too, with Fulton and Figueroa. And to me, that's a 50-50 fight.
Okay. Donovan Casp asks, if you could have one celebrity to join you on a boxing broadcast, who would you pick to call the fight with you?
All right. Do I have to specify whether they're straight or high? How do I do that?
Well, let's keep it straight. Just
all right.
you
So
know,
this would be straight view. Listen, I've had a lot of fun with celebrities. You know, I've done lots of boxing matches with Mario Lopez, who of course knows the sport very well. I just had Snoop Dogg sitting with me, among others, on the Triller show, and I've sat in with a lot of celebrities. I'll tell you somebody who I think would be a really cool broadcaster to sit with doing a fight. And he was a guest on this show. He was the star of Mindhunter, Lights Out, a series in which he played a boxer, Holt McCannally, who is a very fine actor and is a very thoughtful guy. And if somebody told him he was going to sit in and do the boxing matches with us, I guarantee he'd study his heart out. He'd show up knowing all the fighters, and he would bring an A game to it. So he would be fun. Plus, he's such a great guy. It would be fun to sit and do it with him. I think he would be great.
And who would be your favorite politician to have sit in?
Oh, boy. Well, that's a tricky one, right? Who would be fun to call a boxing match with? Well, whoever I say is going to get 50% of the people will be mad at me and 50% of the people will think it's a good choice. So I'm not sure I can even select one. You know, they used to have, in the old days, I remember watching the Cub games. They used to have, back when I was a kid, they would have the senators like Everett Dirksen in Illinois, and Paul Douglas. They would come there and they would sit in on the Cub games. And they were hysterical, you know, coming on there. Now, I will say I spent a lot of time with John McCain, you know, who's since passed, of course. And John would have been fun to do a boxing match with. He was a very big boxing fan. And, of course, he helped bring through the Muhammad Ali Act, which has helped in some ways with the sport of boxing and was designed to try and kind of clean things up a little bit. But John would have been great to do a boxing match with. I sat at dinner with him and his wife Cindy on a number of occasions while he was preparing the Muhammad Ali Act. So John would have been good to do boxing with.
And I did a girls' high school. This career has gone, it's just shoot through the roof. I did the girls' high school Nevada State Championship with Harry Reid as my color.
Harry Reid, who also was an amateur boxer.
Searchlight, Nevada. And
yeah.
I said, I wanted to say something nice about his opponent, John Ensign, who he beat by 428 votes. We called him Landslide Reid. And he knew everything bad about John Ensign and brought it up on the broadcast.
Perfect. So, just what you needed, right?
You don't mess with Harry Reid.
Nice bipartisan. I once played in a celebrity basketball game with John Ensign when he was senator. Let me tell you something. He was a good hoopster. Did not know what the word pass meant. I was on the same team as him, and he could fire away and he could drain, you know, jumpers, but you didn't look to him for assists. So what can I say? Look, I'm following down Harry Reid's path and saying bad things about John Ensign. Oh well.
Well, I talked to Al from USA Boxing this morning. We were trading stories, and I told him about playing on a team with you, and you do pass the ball.
I am a passer. That's true. I'm not. There are many things I don't do great in basketball, but passing is one of my traits, so that's good.
Yeah. Every time you pass the ball, you don't miss a shot, my coach told me one time.
That's true, right. Yeah, exactly.
So Shay Simmons asks, yes, how does the 122-pound landscape look? What's next for Danny Roman? Does Inoue move up from bantamweight?
Yeah. That division, of course, I say is one of the best in boxing, and it was the one that was on display for us last week and will be, as we mentioned, in September, and we'll probably have a few other people on before then. Danny Roman, by winning that fight, you know, he's the number one contender, mandatory for the title that Stephen Fulton has, and yet Fulton is fighting a unifying title fight against Figueroa. So he's not available to Danny Roman. The man who beat Roman for his title, who has a world title, Mirjan Akhmadiev, is somebody he could fight and deserves a rematch with, because he lost a razor-thin decision to him. And he's hoping that he can get a rematch with him, and I hope he does get a rematch. No former champion deserves a rematch more than Danny Roman, and anyone that saw him against a very tough Ricardo Espinoza on our air the other night can dispute that. Danny Roman is a brilliant technician. And that weight class, you know, it has Angelo Leo, who I mentioned before, who had a world title. Rais Salim, who's been a guest on this show, who is a fantastic 122-pounder. Carlos Castro, another young 122-pounder who's excellent. A number of great fighters. And they mentioned Inoue, Naoya Inoue, who's a 118-pound champion, who they've talked about him moving up. Now, he has the physical frame, certainly, to move up to 122. He and John Riel Casimero, who we're going to have fighting on Showtime this summer against Rigondeaux for his bantamweight championship, could also move up from 118. So I don't know if they both have plans to do that, but they certainly could. They were supposed to fight each other, but that fight had to be called off, and then it never happened again. But Inoue and Casimero would make that division even more insanely talented than it already is. But I expect to have great fights in that division over the course of the next 2 years.
Hey, Al, you remember the days when a 4-pound weight fluctuation was a big decision?
Yeah, like now. Yeah, it used to be. And then now going up from 118 to 122, it still is a big deal.
Okay. Our next question, one of our loyal listeners asked a question, Rob Ovet. I sent this about a month ago, but he didn't see the show where he answered it. So he's asking again, who had been in their prime, who would have won, Tyson or Foreman?
Yeah, well, here's what we have to figure out, which prime, right? There was George Foreman in his younger days when he was heavyweight champion, and then there was George Foreman in his older days after he beat Michael Moore when he was in his 40s. It is interesting. So, and then you take Tyson, I guess, during his first championship run. I guess that would be his prime, not the second time he won the title when he ended up losing it to Evander Holyfield. But if you take the young Tyson, and if I had to pick a Foreman that would have actually been a better bet either Foreman, to be perfectly candid, I actually think that either Foreman was a bad style matchup for Mike Tyson. He had a way, and I talked to Foreman at length about this, and when he came back as a heavyweight, he was expecting Mike Tyson to be the guy who he was going to face for a world championship, not Evander Holyfield, and ended up being Evander Holyfield, of course. And so he had it in his brain how he was going to fight Mike Tyson, and he felt that Tyson, who was shorter than him, and he felt he could physically push Tyson around, and he could use the uppercut, and that he would hurt him badly like he did Joe Frazier when he fought him. This might be heresy. I tend to agree that I think George Foreman would have been a nightmare matchup for Mike Tyson. And whether it was the younger Foreman, who I think was slightly less likely, believe it or not, to be perfect against Tyson, or the old Foreman who had found his jab at that point and was much better with the jab, I think either one might have been difficult for Mike Tyson.
And on the George Foreman front, have you ever seen a fighter have as much of a transformation personality-wise as George Foreman 1 versus George Foreman 2?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there's a caveat to that. The personality he was able to show to the public, because I don't really think he changed that much. He was kind of a funny guy when he was younger. It's just that he kind of did play into the idea that he liked Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was kind of a little bit of a mentor to him. And so he kind of adopted that a little bit. But I think the George Foreman that most of the people I know that were around him say he was pretty funny back then. But then later in life, he got to kind of show that part of his personality. And yes, in terms of what the public saw, one of the biggest transformations you could imagine.
And did he ever pay you for that idea you had on the grill?
I think that was my idea, wasn't it? Yeah. No. George did pretty well with that grill thing.
Yeah, isn't that
Yeah.
funny to have a device like that and make? I think I heard over $100 million over the course of
The sale was very lucrative when he sold the rights to that. Yes.
Great. And next question: is Michael Buffer the greatest ring announcer ever? Though Jimmy Lennon Jr. definitely would be tough competition.
Well, I know both of these gentlemen very well. You know, we've had both of them as guests on the show. And in my early years, when I started at ESPN, shortly after I started, Michael Buffer came on, maybe a year or two after, he came on to start doing ring announcing on the old ESPN series. And that was the beginning of his career in ring announcing. And he did the ESPN fights for a number of years. And then, of course, the second phase of my career, when I went to Showtime in 2004, Jimmy Lennon was there waiting for me. And of course, I had known Jimmy very well and done some fights in which he was ring announcer prior to going to Showtime. And each of them, you know, have a slightly different style of doing it. Although I think both of them, along with Jimmy's dad, who really did bring it into his Jimmy Lennon Sr., they were the ones that made Jimmy's dad elevated ring announcing from the gruff, you know, I'm Johnny Addy, you know, it's 4 rounds, and you know, that kind of stuff, to being more of a dignified host for the sport. And Jimmy Lennon Sr., who was a former big band singer and, you know, had just an impeccable style about him, he started to launch that. Then Michael Buffer and Jimmy Lennon Jr., of course, kind of really enhanced that, and they became known worldwide, and they became more of the host of boxing as opposed to what we had previously thought of as ring announcers. And so I love both those guys, and it'd be like, you know, picking between Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. You know, you can't do it.
Okay, and it's kind of funny because through you, I've met Michael Buffer and obviously been on the show and stuff, and really a class guy. But it would be ironic that 20 years ago, his brother got hooked up, or less than 20 years ago, with UFC and had a wonderful career over there.
It's amazing because his brother did a lot with Michael running his business affairs, and I don't know if he still, when he stopped doing that, but he was a very integral part of Michael being successful with his branding, and God knows he's done enough branding. Then he got his own, you know, made his own way to fame through the UFC brand, which is pretty amazing.
If I say let's get ready to, and you say rumble, will we get charged?
Probably, yeah. Maybe
Okay.
no. Maybe he'll let us get by with that. I'm not sure.
Okay, sounds good. And our final question, Anthony Vito Folletti asked, Al, did you always have the ultimate goal of covering boxing?
Strange. That's an interesting question. I've been asked it many times. Really, no. I kind of got pushed into boxing. I was in hard news. For the first 10 years of my career, I was a print journalist in the Chicago area, and I became managing editor of a chain of newspapers, Lerner Newspapers, which were a series of community newspapers all around Chicago and the suburbs. And I got with them as a reporter out of school and rose through the ranks, eventually becoming managing editor. And I wanted to get into sports all that time. All I really wanted to do was go downtown to the Sun-Times or Chicago Tribune and work as a sports writer. I never got the opportunity to do that. And I kept getting pushed up the ladder at Lerner. And so I started freelancing in sports, writing for different papers like the Washington Star. And because I had worked as an amateur boxer, or I'd been an amateur boxer, I started writing for Ring Magazine, covering some fights and freelancing for them. And then I got an opportunity I was at a party, and a guy came up to me and he said, somebody told me that you write about boxing. I said, yeah. He said, I'm a book editor. He said, I need to have somebody write this book called Boxing for Beginners that's involved for young boxers. And I said, oh, okay, I'm game. Well, I wrote that book, and Kenny Norton did the foreword for it. We got him to do the foreword. And that started to push me in more of a boxing direction. And then I kept writing for Boxing Illustrated. And then I clawed my way onto ESPN when they were just in a fledgling state, coming to the 4 different locations that they came to. One of them was Chicago, and I clawed my way onto that broadcast. And when I did that, to be perfectly candid, my assumption was that I would be on the boxing broadcast, but it would be an easy transition to do other coverage of other sports on ESPN. Silly me. Number one, we did boxing 48 weeks a year. So there was no time to cover other sports. And it was, I was so much identified as the boxing guy that it wasn't, occasionally I would get some opportunities like covering the draft for the NFL or doing some other coverage for SportsCenter. But then it wasn't until the early 2000s when I got more of an opportunity at ESPN to do much more for SportsCenter, and I did for several years, covering Major League Baseball and other sports. My goal was always to do all other sports, but boxing pretty much took control of everything. And so over the years, I've done radio shows. I did one on ESPN affiliate in Las Vegas and on other places. I've done general sports radio shows, but boxing kind of just took over the landscape for me. And once it did, then that was what I was known for and what I did. So
if you had your druthers, what sport would you, as let's say a home team play-by-play guy, what sport would you want to cover?
Yeah, if I was doing play-by-play for a team, and I was once getting considered to do a studio show for. I once talked to somebody about doing it for the Utah Jazz, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, and it didn't work out, but I was in the running for it to just go up and do studio shows. But it would be NBA. I think that would be the most fun for me. Would be to do play-by-play on an NBA team. So
and we have a mutual guy we both worked with, Tim Neverett, who went from doing the Red Sox and he's now at the Dodgers, but 162 games a year plus pre-spring, that would be a lot of work, wouldn't it?
It is. Baseball, I think, Barry Tompkins, who's been, of course, a partner of mine for years, he did a couple seasons with the Giants, and he was saying that you really, and I love baseball. I played baseball when I was younger in high school and college, and I love the sport, but he said you have to really be a baseball lifer in a lot of respects to really want to do the full seasons of baseball teams, and you have to be pretty focused in and dialed in on it. And it would be fun. I think it would be great. But again, it's a different animal, I think, than doing some of these other sports. So
and finally, I remember. And I've told this story before, switching over at the Santa Fe Casino, all the TVs in the whole casino to watch you do a game from up in Montana or something. But right. You were on about 65. The general manager of the casino played on our hockey team, and you got switched over. Every TV in the Santa Fe was that ESPN game. So
I was doing a game between Montana State and I want to say the Raging Cajuns of McNeese or somebody like that. It was I did a season of play-by-play in which I did the Big Sky Conference. I guess isn't Montana in there? I think they are.
Yep, that is. Yeah.
And so that was a out of the conference game. But I did a season of college basketball, which was a lot of fun. I did play-by-play with a number of different really good analysts, it was so much fun to do those games. And so that I'm sure everybody in that casino really was desperate to see that specific game,
Well, it's good to have power. Hey, does ESPN fly you guys when you're out doing games first class, coach? How's it work?
Well, back in the day, it was you were a coachy boy, that's for sure. Because they flew around so many people. I don't know what it's like now, but they fly around so many people that you were scrambling for upgrades in your life most of the time. So I hate to burst people's bubble, but back when they were flying you around to do those camps, it was not deluxe, that's for sure, but it was fun. We had a good time. I want to mention our friend and cohort at the Worldwide Boxing Channel, where we have great videos that you can see. World Class Boxing Channel on YouTube. Go to it. And Tom Yankello has great videos there, both informational and historical, that you can glom onto. Now, next week on our show, we're going to have a very important show. We're going to interview Tris Dixon, who's a author that wrote the book Damage, which is about fighters and the safety of that they have or don't have in the ring. It's a very important book and sobering topic, but one that needs to be looked at and talked about. And he has done it in a really excellent book published by Hannibal Publications. And so we're going to be talking to him about all that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, which we got to do a lot of questions, which we don't normally get to do with all the folks. And Trip will be back on store next week.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Al.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.